And when ye shall receive these things, I would exhort you that ye would ask God, the eternal Father, in the name of Christ, if these things are not true. And if ye shall ask with a sincere heart, with a real intent, having faith in Christ, he will manifest the truth of it unto you, by the power of the Holy Ghost.
Since the restoration of the Gospel and subsequent printing of the Book of Mormon, most people have taken for granted that the Hill Cumorah of the Book of Mormon, from where the prophet Mormon looked out upon his fallen people, is the same hill located near Palmyra in upstate New York, where Joseph Smith Jr. recovered the gold plates deposited by the prophet Moroni and with God-given power translated ancient writings into what we know today as the Book of Mormon. From its pages we read,
Therefore I made this record out of the plates of Nephi, and hid up in the Hill Cumorah all the records which had been entrusted to me by the hand of the Lord, save it were these few plates which I gave unto my son Moroni.
Could there be more than one hill? One where the prophet Mormon hid up the records of his people, and another in New York where Moroni, nearly 36 years after the great battle, buried the portion of the record given to him by his father? If this is true, where is the hill Mormon called Cumorah, and what are the facts surrounding its story? This and other questions have been asked by scholars and students of the Book of Mormon for years. In 1841, John Lloyd Stevens, an adventurous New York attorney, published an account of his travels as an emissary of the United States government to Guatemala titled Incidents of Travel in Central America, Chiapas, and Yucatan. His work included detailed line drawings by a companion, Frederick Catherwood, of ancient Mayan temples and carved stones called stela, and introduced 19th century readers to the fascinating world of ancient Central American cultures and the artifacts they left behind. Stevens' work was the subject of a book review published in the Times and Seasons, an early LDS Church newspaper which encouraged the saints to link the cultures written about by Stevens with those of the Book of Mormon. In the October 1, 1842 issue, editor Joseph Smith Jr. wrote, "It would not be a bad plan to compare Mr. Stevens' ruined cities with those in the Book of Mormon. Light cleaves to light, and facts are supported by facts. The truth injures no one." Since that time, numerous expeditions have traveled to southern Mexico and Central America searching for physical remains of the Book of Mormon. In 1952, the New World Archaeological Foundation was established. In 1961, the NWAF became associated with Brigham Young University, which for years has conducted excavations in Chiapas, Mexico. Although staying away from direct Book of Mormon studies, the Foundation has gained respect as one of the best organizations doing field archaeological research and provides raw data for others to draw parallels with Book of Mormon events. Most LDS scholars and archaeologists agree that southern Mexico and Central America, or Mesoamerica, are the lands of the Book of Mormon. This area meets all the major criteria that establishes where it all took place. Criteria such as a written language, archaeological evidence dating to both Jaredite and Nephite times, and geography such as mountains and rivers matching descriptions found in the Book of Mormon. There is also a written secular history paralleling many important Book of Mormon events. David Asay and Randy Mellor are not archaeologists, geologists, or religious scholars. Both are businessmen and friends. David from Atlanta, Georgia, and Randy from Salt Lake City, Utah. They share a keen interest in Book of Mormon history and a desire to share what they have learned about the answers to some of those unanswered questions.
I'm fascinated with the lands and history of the Book of Mormon, and so I went to New York on a research quest. And although the hill where Joseph Smith recovered the gold plates deposited by Moroni is there, I found no evidence of any major civilization dating back to Jaredite and Nephite times. In fact, the oldest known civilization to inhabit the area was the Seneca Indians, dating back to about 1000 AD. As I continued to study, I found myself drawn toward Mexico, where there is a great deal of evidence, including archaeological evidence dating to Jaredite and Nephite times, a written Mexican history which correlates with the Jaredites, and geographical features which match those described in the Book of Mormon. Most importantly, a hill called Vahia in Veracruz, Mexico, which meets all the criteria of ancient Cumorah.
We would invite you to join us on an expedition to answer this question, not to shake your faith or to change any of the doctrines contained in the Book of Mormon, but as a great adventure to find where these events took place. Take a look at the evidence and you be the judge.
Piecing together facts about the Book of Mormon geology, archaeology, and Mexican history is almost like a puzzle, putting together small pieces to reveal a larger, clearer picture. In this case, a picture that is over 4,500 years old. One of the most significant pieces of that puzzle was revealed in 1941. In July of that year, at a roundtable conference sponsored by the Mexican Society of Anthropology, being held in Mexico City, American Matthew Sterling, along with two Mexican colleagues, Miguel Covarrubias and Alfonso Caso, presented documented evidence of a group of people they called the Olmecs. This culture settled along the Gulf Coast of Mexico and dated from 2500 to 300 BC. The significance of this new information was staggering. Here is a vast civilization predating the Mayans, long thought to be the oldest civilization in Mexico. Archaeological sites representing the height of the culture, 1500 BC to 300 BC, are located in the Mexican states of Veracruz and Tabasco.
This Olmec head, situated in the square at Santiago Tuxtla, is at the base of the hill Vahia. It proves, along with several other heads we have seen here, that there was a great civilization that existed 2,500 years before Christ. They meet the criteria. They had the language. They had the skills.
Archaeological sites showed a people with planned ceremonial centers and buildings oriented toward magnetic north, very large, high-quality monuments sculpted in stone. They had an organized religious society with ceremonial rituals and a concept of life after death, an organized calendar and language system engraved on stone, and an organized social and governmental structure. They had established commercial routes demonstrating Olmec influence outside their immediate heartland. Their empire stretched as far west as Acapulco and as far south as El Salvador, the state of Oaxaca, and the coast of Guatemala.
They had it all: language, trade, and religion. They met all the criteria necessary to be classified as a civilization. In fact, the Olmecs were the only documented civilization meeting all these criteria in North and South America, dating back that far. And it gets better from here.
This mother culture of all the Americas was first mentioned in a history of Mexico written in 1600 by the Mexican historian Fernando de Alva Ixtlilxochitl. Ixtlilxochitl's history tells of a people who were giants and came to Mexico having first crossed many lands and waters, from the great tower where the languages became confounded, except their own. Who were these people? The correlation between the Olmecs and the Jaredites of the Book of Mormon is compelling.
Finding evidence of the Jaredite civilization is a huge step in telling the Book of Mormon's story. To find out why it is so important, we went to the experts. Dr. Joseph L. Allen is the author of Exploring the Lands of the Book of Mormon. He is a leading authority on Book of Mormon history and has taken more than 200 tour groups to Mesoamerica. He has done extensive historical and archaeological research on Book of Mormon lands for over 30 years.
If you're going to do a study of this nature, pay strict attention to time and place. So if we're going to make a comparison or attempt to make a comparison between the Olmecs and the Jaredites, we better understand first who the Jaredites are, where they came from, when did they reach their highest civilization, how they were destroyed, and other things that we can glean from the Book of Mormon. Now, once we've done that, then we can begin looking at other places, and then we require that there's a written language, because the Book of Mormon, of course, was written. We require archaeological evidence and historical evidence.
Almost 6 centuries after the last Jaredite battle, as the Nephite prophet Moroni was abridging the 24 gold plates, he gave us valuable information concerning the Jaredites, their culture, where they lived, and what eventually happened to them. Ether chapter 1, verse 33 tells us they came from the great tower where the languages became confounded, except for Jared and his family. In Ether chapter 10, verses 20 through 21, they built a city on the narrow neck of land, by the place where the sea divides the land. They preserved the land southward for a wilderness to get game, and the land northward was covered with inhabitants. In the same chapter, verses 22 through 28, mentions that the Jaredites were industrious, with established trade routes. They mined and worked with all types of metals, made fine cloth, agricultural tools for farming, and working with animals. They made weapons of war and were greatly skilled craftsmen.
In addition to what we read in the Book of Mormon about the ancient civilization we call the Jaredites, and in addition to what we learn archaeologically about the Olmecs, we can appeal to a third source, that is the secular history of Mexico. For example, I have in my hand a 2-volume work by a man by the name of Don Fernando de Alva de Isla-Xochitl. He originally published his works in 1600 AD, that's 230 years before the coming forth of the Book of Mormon. The correlations between what he wrote about the ancient history of Mexico and what we read from these other sources are quite compelling. For example, both talk about them coming from the Tower of Babel, and their languages were not confounded. Both Isla-Xochitl and the Book of Mormon talk about the original settlers coming from the North Country. Moroni said, in this North Country, Isla-Xochitl said they were in the northern parts of the land. They both indicate that they were large people. As Moroni called them a large stature, Isla-Xochitl called them giants. And their final destructions came about as a result of a civil war, a massive civil war. We know that both from the Book of Mormon archaeological evidence, and of course Isla-Xochitl talks about it also.
In this land called New Spain, Mexico, there were giants, as demonstrated by their bones that had been discovered in many areas. The ancient Tolteca record keepers called them Kinametzin.
Many artifacts from several Olmec archaeological sites show evidence of this great conflict. Michael Cole, Harvard graduate and recognized authority on the Olmec culture, states, "There is no evidence of an outside invasion. The amount of pent-up hatred and fury represented by this enormous act of destruction must have been awesome indeed. These monuments are very large, and basalt is a very hard stone. Wherever possible, heads were smashed from bodies, altars were smashed to pieces, and strange dimpled depressions and slots were cut into colossal heads."
We do see some strong similarities, what appear to be strong similarities, between the Olmecs and the Jaredites. That is, they both came from the tower, they reached their high civilization at the same time, and they were destroyed by a great civil war at the same time. And by doing that, it now identifies as to what area, because the Olmecs, we know where they lived, and now if they are the same culture, that takes us there to look for the Jaredites. In making a comparison with two civilizations, it's helpful when you find name correlations. That implies not only where the dates are the same, but proper names, place names, and even phrases that may appear in the ancient language as with what we see in the Book of Mormon.
Another expert we turn to is Dr. Bruce Warren, president of the Ancient America Foundation and co-author of the book, New Evidences of Christ in Ancient America. He has taught archaeology and Book of Mormon courses at Brigham Young University and is one of the world's leading authorities on ancient Mayan and Olmec civilizations. He is one of the few world scholars who can read ancient Mesoamerica codices.
In the Book of Mormon and the Book of Ether, concerned with the Jaredites in chapters 1 and 10, there is a mention of a particular king by the name of Kish.
And it came to pass that Coram did that which was good in the sight of the Lord all his days, and he begat many sons and daughters. And after he had seen many days, he did pass away, even like unto the rest of the earth. And Kish reigned in his stead. And it came to pass that Kish passed away also, and Lib reigned in his stead.
It would be interesting to see if we have evidence of this king in archaeology. Fortunately, we do have his name in Maya hieroglyphics from the archaeological site of Palenque in the state of Chiapas, southern Mexico. In the Tablet of the Cross from this site, it gives the name of the king, it gives his birth date as March 8th, 993 BC, his accession to the throne in March 25th, 967 BC. The glyphs at the bottom of this particular column of writing says that he was the divine ancestor of the Palenque line of kings.
The Olmec and Jaredite histories fit nicely together. But why is this so important when talking about the location of the Hill Cumorah?
We've conducted tours to Mesoamerica for the last 30 years. It's been our observation that members of the church have no difficulty with equating Mesoamerica as the lands of the Book of Mormon. It's a little more difficult as they try to establish the relationship between Mesoamerica and New York in terms of where the last battle took place. The Book of Mormon, of course, is very specific on the subject as it talks about the Jaredites and the Nephites in relation to each other. In the Hill Rama, the Jaredites is the same as the Hill Cumorah, the Nephites. In other words, if you found the Jaredites, you found the Nephites. And if the Jaredites and the Olmecs are the same people, then the conclusion that follows is that the Nephites were probably destroyed in that area. In order to solidify that, we look for other things such as geographical places in the Book of Mormon, such as the waters of Ripley Ancum and the Hill Shim, which played a significant role in both cultures.
In Ether chapter 9, verse 3, Omer, a Jaredite king, is warned by the Lord to flee the land with his family.
Wherefore Omer departed out of the land with his family and traveled many days, and came over and passed by the hill of Shim, and came over by the place where the Nephites were destroyed.
One of the things that we look for in a study of this nature is to see if there's any language tie-in with what we read in the Book of Mormon. We have two such name correlations. One is the hill Sintepec. Sin is that's an Aztec word, but translated into Maya is Shim. Shim means corn, so it would be Corn Hill. Mormon was told to go to the hill Shim and retrieve the records.
Therefore, when ye are about 20 and 4 years old, I would that ye should remember these things that ye have observed concerning this people. And when ye are of that age, go to the land of Antum, unto a hill which shall be called Shim, and there have I deposited unto the Lord all the sacred engravings concerning this people.
As we discuss the geographic features around the Hill Rama Cumorah, one that is often overlooked is the hill Shem, briefly mentioned in the Book of Mormon. Translated, it means Corn Hill. Behind me is the hill Sintepec in the state of Veracruz, Mexico, which also means Corn Hill. Just a short distance away is the hill Vahia. So we not only have the geographic connection, but we also have a name correlation directly from the Book of Mormon.
And when Coriantumr saw that he was about to fall, he fled again before the people of Shiz. And it came to pass that he came to the waters of Ripliancum, which by interpretation is large or to exceed all.
Situated close to the hill Vahia, which means lookout or vigilante hill, the candidate for the Hill Cumorah that we're talking about. There's a massive water basin called the Papaloapan Water Basin.
This is the Papaloapan Basin. It is huge. This basin of water extends for miles in many directions. This began to bring to life what they had talked about in these ancient records.
The old name of the city that is now called Tres Zapotes is Wayapan. The Book of Mormon refers to these waters as the waters of Ripliancum. Both the word Ripliancum and Wayapan, they both have the same meaning, that is, very large waters.
The Papaloapan lagoons are the largest bodies of water in the area, excluding the sea. They form part of the Great Papaloapan drainage system, which carries enormous quantities of water into the Gulf of Mexico at the port of Alvarado. Since the area is neither a lake nor a river, it is a good candidate for Ripliancum.
And it came to pass that the army of Coriantumr did pitch their tents by the hill Ramah, and it was the same hill where my father Mormon did hide up the records unto the Lord, which were sacred.
Moroni also mentions the hill Ramah, where the prophet Mormon buried the records of the Nephites. They called this the Hill Cumorah. This means that the last battles of both the Jaredites and the Nephites took place here in this area. We came back to Santiago Tuxtla in the state of Veracruz, Mexico, to the hill Vahia. We believe this is where it all took place.
The Cerro, or Hill Vahia, is a significant landmark located near the Olmec archaeological site of Tres Zapotes and is only about 30 miles from the hill Sintepec. From the top of Vahia, looking inland, there is an expansive plain that connects with the coast. There are a few minor peaks and valleys between Vahia and the Papaloapan Basin. Behind Vahia, towards the Gulf of Mexico, and stretching down towards Coatzacoalcos, lies the heart of the volcanic Tuxtla mountain range. At the base of the hill, there are large fountains or springs of underground water flowing from the hillside. Some cascade over ledges into pools and is the source of the rivers that encompass the hill. They are used today as a source of drinking water for the city of Santiago Tuxtla. A prominent Mexican archaeologist, Ignacio Bernal, states,
Geographical studies indicate that from the beginning of the first millennium BC until the present, the habitat of the area has not changed. That is to say, it has had the same climate and bodies of water.
it seems logical that a military commander like Mormon or Coriantumr would choose this fertile area because it had all the necessary resources to provide the food and water for their needs.
Cerro Vahia in southern Veracruz is a prominent mountain that has the same meaning as the Hill Ramah in the Jaredite account. It is in a very fertile area where you have volcanic soils that are rich. Today they can grow commercial tobacco and sugarcane, and there's a great variety of fruits and vegetables that is native to this area. It is an area of many streams, bodies of water, waterfalls. It all fits the description in the Book of Ether of a land of waters and fountains, etc.
There is a great deal of evidence of ancient inhabitants occupying the area. Numerous archaeological sites dating from both Jaredite and Nephite times literally surround the hill and are clearly visible from the roads.
whenever one drives on the highway from Alvarado into the Tuxtla Mountains, they'll pass through 23 kilometers of archaeological mounds all the way on both sides of the highway. Way back in 1955, we stopped at one cut and pulled out pottery that dated to 600 BC, just in about 2 minutes' time.
The Hill Vahia is about 2,400 feet high, easily large enough for Mormon to view the bodies of over 230,000 fallen people.
We approached this project with an open mind, but found compelling evidence that the hill where Mormon buried the vast Nephite record and where the final great battles of the Jaredites and the Nephites took place is not the same hill where Moroni buried those plates recovered by Joseph Smith. So if this is true, how did the gold plates get to New York? The explanation is really very simple. We know from Scripture that Moroni wandered for approximately 36 years after the final great battles at Cumorah, more than ample time to be led by the Lord to the hill near Palmyra, New York. Now let's review some of the things that we've learned so far.
It's always been my approach to this study to look for the 2 or more witnesses, and so if we can find evidence of different sources talking about the same thing, then it develops more credibility. For example, we know what it says in the Book of Mormon about the Jaredites, about the Hill Ramah, and about the Hill Cumorah. So then we appeal to archaeology, see what the evidence. In other words, there's a second witness there. And the third, of course, is the local history. And by forcing the comparison of 3 witnesses, we do come up with some pretty impressive things. For example, in essence, all 3 witnesses tell about the first civilization or the mother culture of the Americas coming from the Tower. That is the culture that settled along the Gulf of Mexico. All 3 witnesses indicate that they were a large people, that their civilization lasted a long time, and that that came to an end as a result of a great civil war. The fact that it was a civilization, has already been discussed, is very significant. We occasionally see proposals that the Book of Mormon history took place in other places, such as Peru or New York. The problem with that is if you don't have the 3 witnesses to compare with each other, that is local history, archaeology, and the Book of Mormon, requiring at all times language and so forth, then you stand on pretty shaky ground.
In the Book of Mormon, Mormon chapter 1, verses 2 and 3, when Mormon was 10 years old, Amoron hid the record of his people in the hill Shim, and gave Mormon a charge to retrieve them when he was 24 years old.
Therefore, when ye are about 20 and 4 years old, I would that ye should remember these things that ye have observed concerning this people. And when ye are of that age, go to the land of Antum, unto the hill which shall be called Shim. And there I have deposited unto the Lord all the sacred engravings concerning this people. And behold, ye shall take the plates of Nephi unto yourself, and the remainder shall ye leave in the place where they are. And ye shall engrave on the plates of Nephi all the things that ye have observed concerning this people.
Mormon knew the area and the location of the hill Shim. It's where he grew up. And now the Nephites were fighting for their homes.
And it came to pass that I did speak unto my people, and did urge them with great energy, that they would stand boldly before the Lamanites and fight for their wives, and their children, and their houses, and their homes.
Seeing the desperate circumstances of his people, Mormon worried about the remainder of the records Amoron had deposited in the hill Shim.
And now I, Mormon, seeing that the Lamanites were about to overthrow the land, therefore I did go to the hill Shim, and take up all the records which Amoron had hid up unto the Lord.
In the year 385 AD, Mormon, now around the age of 74, gathers his people.
And I, Mormon, wrote an epistle unto the king of the Lamanites, and desired of him that he would grant unto us that we might gather together our people unto the land of Cumorah, by a hill which was called Cumorah, and there we could give them battle.
In verse 4, Mormon tells us that Cumorah was in a land of many rivers, waters, and fountains.
And it came to pass that we did march forth to the land of Cumorah, and we did pitch our tents round about the hill Cumorah. And it was in a land of many waters, rivers, and fountains. And here we had hoped to gain advantage over the Lamanites.
Mormon and his people were still defending their homes. There is no evidence that they traveled any great distance. In fact, it would have been virtually impossible for a group of perhaps hundreds of thousands of people to have traveled very far.
Therefore I made this record out of the plates of Nephi, and hid up in the hill Cumorah all the records which had been entrusted to me by the hand of the Lord, save it were these few plates which I gave unto my son Moroni.
Now that Moroni had the portion of the records that would eventually be translated into the Book of Mormon, let's look at the scriptures that tells what he did with them. Mormon chapters 8 and 9 were written by Moroni. In chapter 8, verses 3 and 4, Moroni states,
And my father also was killed by them, and I even remain alone to write the sad tale of the destruction of my people. But behold, they are gone, and I fulfill the commandment of my father. And whether they will slay me, I know not. Therefore I will write and hide up the records in the earth, and whither I go, it mattereth not.
In the book of Moroni, chapter 1, verses 1 through 3, Moroni finishes the account of the Jaredites in the book of Ether. He is still hiding from the Lamanites and fears for his life. They put to death every Nephite that will not deny Christ.
And I, Moroni, will not deny the Christ, wherefore I wander whithersoever I can for the safety of my own life.
Moroni knew that the hill Ramah of the Jaredites was the same as the hill Cumorah of the Nephites. After all, he wrote the record of the, or abridged the record of the Jaredites.
And it came to pass that the army of Coriantumr did pitch their tents by the hill Ramah, and it was the same hill where my father Mormon did hide up the records unto the Lord, which were sacred.
However, he didn't abridge the records until after the battle at Cumorah, when his father had hidden up all the records in the hill Cumorah and gave Moroni the record that we have known as the Book of Mormon. His father then told him that he had other records to give him, which talked about the Jaredites. At that point, it appears that Moroni then abridged the Jaredite record and attached that portion, which we call the sealed portion, to his father's record. He then indicated that he would wander whithersoever he wandered to stay out of reach of the Lamanites. And 15 years after the battle at Cumorah, or at 400 AD, Moroni tells us, as recorded in Moroni chapter 1, that he is still as yet not perished, and that his objective was to preserve the records, which he did. He said, I suppose not to have written more, but he did, and he also indicated that anyone who did not deny the Christ were being put to death by the Lamanites, which implies that he was still living among the Lamanites. After that, his wandering would have taken him to New York, many miles away from Veracruz, Mexico, where he deposited the plates in that small hill there that we today have come to know as Cumorah also. It's interesting to me that the Lord not only prepared Moroni, but prepared the prophet Joseph Smith so that those records could come together. And as a result, we have the Book of Mormon today.
And I can imagine the battles that took place here, killing millions of people during Jaredite times. And I think back of Mormon as he looked upon this scene when the tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of his people were slain. And if you go to chapter 6 in Mormon, and I'm beginning at verse 16, and my soul was rent with anguish because of the slain of my people, and I cried,
O ye fair ones, how could ye have departed from the ways of the Lord? O ye fair ones, how could ye have rejected that Jesus who stood with open arms to receive you? Behold, if ye had not done this, ye would not have fallen. But behold, ye are fallen, and I mourn your loss.
Take a look at the evidence, and you be the judge.
Most LDS scholars and archaeologists agree that southern Mexico and Central America, or Mesoamerica, are the lands of the Book of Mormon.
As I continued to study, I found myself drawn toward Mexico, where there is a great deal of evidence, including archaeological evidence dating to Jaredite and Nephite times, a written Mexican history which correlates with the Jaredites, and geographical features which match those described in the Book of Mormon.
We do see some strong similarities, what appear to be strong similarities, between the Olmecs and the Jaredites. That is, they both came from the tower, they reached their high civilization at the same time, and they were destroyed by a great civil war.
Ixtlilxochitl's history tells of a people who were giants and came to Mexico having first crossed many lands and waters, from the great tower where the languages became confounded, except their own. Ether chapter 1, verse 33 tells us they came from the Tower of Babel, where the languages were confounded except for Jared and his family. Here is a vast civilization predating the Mayans, long thought to be the oldest civilization in Mexico.
It gives the name of the king, it gives his birth date as March 8th, 993 BC.
Excuse me, the Hill Rama, the Jaredites, is the same as the Hill Cumorah, the Nephites. In other words, if you found the Jaredites, you found the Nephites.
The Cerro, or Hill Vahia, is a significant landmark located near the Olmec archaeological site of Tres Zapotes, and is only about 30 miles from the hill Sintepec.
It is an area of many streams, bodies of water, waterfalls. It all fits the description in the Book of Ether of a land of waters and fountains, etc.
Numerous archaeological sites dating from both Jaredite and Nephite times literally surround the hill.
Way back in 1955, we stopped at one cut and pulled out pottery that dated to 600 BC, just in about 2 minutes' time.
On the other side of the hill are the waters of Hueyapan, again an Aztec word which translated has the same meaning as Ripliancum in the Book of Mormon.
This area meets all the major criteria that establishes where it all took place. Criteria such as a written language, archaeological evidence dating to both Jaredite and Nephite times, and geography such as mountains and rivers matching descriptions found in the Book of Mormon.
It's interesting to me that the Lord not only prepared Moroni, but prepared the prophet Joseph Smith so that those records could come together, and as a result we have the Book of Mormon today.
We read in Mormon 6, verse 6, where Mormon said, I hid up all of the records in the Hill Cumorah. In other words, he took them to the Hill Shim and put them in the Hill Cumorah. And he says, I hid up all the records in the Hill Cumorah, save these few records. What few records? These few records. And he said, save these few records which I gave to my son Moroni. And then Moroni said, I wander whithersoever I wander, and I'll hide up the records unto the Lord. So this would suggest that Moroni then from 400 AD to 421, which is the last entry in the Book of Mormon, would have wandered that distance from here to New York, which is around 2,000 miles, 2,500 miles, and deposited them in a hill there that the prophet Joseph Smith received them 1,400 years later. That hill subsequently became called by members of the church the Hill Cumorah, and I know that, for example, I grew up assuming that the last battles were fought there.